In 1998, 19-year-old Troy Cook was going through an important rite of passage, moving out of his family home. Troy had worked part-time at an Atlantic superstore while he was still in school, and had been bumped up to full-time after he graduated. While he did not plan to make this position his long-term career, it did provide him with enough income to allow him to begin looking for his first apartment. That May, he moved out of his parents' home in rural Kemptown, Nova Scotia, to an apartment in Truro, the larger town where he worked. He shared a modest 2-bedroom apartment with one of his coworkers that was within walking distance of the store where they worked. On June 10th, just 3 weeks after he moved out, Troy went to visit his family and spent the night with them. The following morning, on June 11th, Troy's father Tom drove him back to Truro. On the way, the two confirmed their plans to meet for dinner the following night. Tom dropped Troy off outside of his apartment, but did not wait to see Troy go inside because he was in a hurry to drop off his car for service and get to work. Approximately a half hour later, the Atlantic superstore where Troy worked received a phone call. Troy, or someone claiming to be him, told his supervisor that he would not be able to make it in for his shift later that day. The call was strange enough in that Troy was not one to call out of work. While he made enough to pay his bills, he could not afford to miss too many shifts. Troy's supervisor was reasonably sure that it was Troy on the phone, but could not be positive, because he did sound strange. As such, it could have been someone other than Troy making the call, or Troy was making the call under duress. When Troy did not show up at the restaurant to meet his family for dinner on June 12th, the day after he was last seen, his father began calling Troy's work and several of his friends to try to find him. When he could not locate his son, he contacted authorities to report Troy missing. The mysterious phone call to the Atlantic superstore got even stranger when the call was traced. Authorities determined that it had been made from a phone booth outside of a Tim Hortons in Bible Hill, Nova Scotia. Bible Hill is a suburb of Truro, one that Troy and his father had to drive past on their way to Troy's apartment on the morning of the 11th. If Troy needed to be in Bible Hill that morning, it does not make sense that he would let his father drive past the town and then retrace his route to get there after being dropped off in Truro. Furthermore, there would not have been enough time for Troy to have made his way from his apartment in Truro to the Tim Hortons in Bible Hill on foot in between the time he was dropped off and the time the phone call was made. Since Troy's apartment was so close to his job, he had not brought his car with him when he moved into Truro. Either Troy did not make the phone call, or some unknown person had to have driven him to the phone booth. When Troy was not immediately located, his family had to make the decision to pack up his apartment and bring his belongings back to their home. Tom Cook saw Troy's roommate at the Atlantic superstore, where he had worked with Troy, and told him about these plans. The roommate asked that Tom leave him Troy's 2 guitars, claiming that is what Troy would have wanted. Troy had only been missing for 2 weeks at the time of this conversation. Tom did not agree to the insensitive and, quite frankly, suspicious request. Tom Cook has spent the 20 years since Troy vanished dedicated to finding his son. He plastered the Truro area with flyers immediately after Troy went missing, and even had one posted in his car so that people could learn about Troy's case wherever he drove. He continues to actively seek out media interviews to keep Troy's case in the public eye. The only real break he has taken from his work came in the spring of 2016, when he had to have surgery and treatment for a brain tumor. The stress and heartbreak of Troy's disappearance ultimately caused Tom and Troy's mother to divorce. In interviews, Tom has also shared his concern that his focus on Troy has negatively impacted his younger son Mike. While Mike is not as public of a figure as his father, he has been active in the search for his older brother. He set up a Facebook group in hopes that spreading awareness about Troy's case will eventually bring answers for his family. Henrietta Cruz lived in Santa Ana, California, with her parents and her younger siblings. As a teenager, she dropped out of Santa Ana High School to take a job in a shop In the spring of 1960, 17-year-old Henrietta met a 24-year-old man named Marl Avila. A month later, the two were married. Henrietta and Marl's hasty marriage did not seem to remain happy for long. By the summer of 1960, Henrietta's parents stopped hearing from her. When they got a hold of Marl to ask him about their daughter, he told them that 3 months into their marriage, Henrietta had packed up her things and left him. Henrietta's parents reported her missing to the police in the beginning of August. After police began investigating Henrietta's whereabouts, Marl claimed to see her at a park in nearby Long Beach, California, on August 20th. A week later, on August 27th, Henrietta's mother received a collect phone call from a woman claiming to be Henrietta. Her mother said that she would accept the charges for the call, but the woman on the other end of the line hung up the phone before Henrietta's mother could actually speak with her. Police would eventually trace the call to San Francisco. That same day, the Cruz family received a telegram. It was signed Henrietta. It said that she was fine and had gotten a job, but did not want to come back to her husband. Police learned that the telegram had been called in from a payphone in San Francisco. The woman who called it in had provided a fake address. An even stranger event occurred over a year after Henrietta went missing. Just before Christmas of 1961, Henrietta's father went outside to get in his car and drive to work. On the trunk of the car were undergarments that had belonged to Henrietta, as well as a belt. There was no other sign of Henrietta, or whoever dropped these items off at the home. The fact that all of these instances of supposed contact with Henrietta stopped short of actual interaction with her is concerning. Why would Henrietta call her mother, but not actually speak with her? It is also suspicious that none of these communications from someone claiming to be Henrietta came until after her parents realized she was gone and contacted the police. It appears as though Henrietta met with foul play, and the person responsible attempted to create the illusion that Henrietta was alive, but living in San Francisco, to keep the police from seriously investigating the case. Since Marl was the last person who saw Henrietta, and he knew that the police were looking for her, it is hard not to be suspicious of his account of how Henrietta left their home. Henrietta's parents appear to have accepted the possibility that she had been killed. They hired a private investigator and offered a reward in Henrietta's case. However, the newspaper ads they ran asking for information were asking for help in locating Henrietta's remains, not discovering where she was living. Marl remarried in 1962, but there is no record of him legally divorcing Henrietta or having her declared dead. He and his second wife remained married until his death in 2012. Henrietta's case remains open with the Santa Ana police. Katrina McVeigh was struggling in 1992. The 27-year-old mother of 3 was in an abusive marriage with Richard McVeigh, who had recently gotten out of prison following a 6-month sentence for domestic violence. After a violent altercation with Richard, Katrina fled their home in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. She was able to stay at a shelter for battered women, but Richard somehow discovered the confidential address of the facility and showed up there looking for her. The shelter believed that this made Katrina a security risk and made her leave. Katrina was then homeless, living for a time in World War II Memorial Park. Eventually, a friend named Judy Burton felt sorry for Katrina and let her come stay with her in her apartment at 295 2nd Avenue. While she was free from Richard, Katrina was cut off from her children and fell into the world of drugs and prostitution to support herself. She was last seen by Judy Burton around May 15, 1992, at the intersection of Lincoln and Front Streets. She got into a car and has not been seen since. Due to Katrina's unstable situation, Judy Burton did not notify police when Katrina never came back to her apartment. After being unable to reach Katrina, her family reported her missing a month after the last known sighting of her. Katrina's mother, Charlotte Saulnier, believes that her daughter was murdered at the time of her disappearance by someone close to her, and that she was buried along the banks of the Blackstone River. This detail comes from a phone call Charlotte received from Katrina's husband Richard a few weeks after she had reported her daughter missing. She claims that in this phone call, Richard told her that Katrina was down by the Blackstone River. Richard McVeigh had an extensive criminal record, serving time in prison both before and after Katrina went missing. He had been in prison until just prior to Katrina's disappearance, and he was back in prison just 4 months after it occurred. His convictions over the years included first-degree sexual assault and child abuse. His first wife allegedly died under suspicious circumstances. Richard ultimately died of lung cancer while incarcerated. Richard's phone call, along with rumors going around Woonsocket that also maintained that Katrina's remains were buried near the Blackstone River, led Katrina's brother, Todd Tebow, to spend his weekends searching the banks of the river. After a few weeks, he found one of the few pieces of physical evidence in the case. Along the Blackstone River, where it runs through Costa Park, Todd found a shirt he believes is the one his sister was last seen wearing. This discovery made Todd believe that he was on the right track, and he continued to scour the riverbanks in the coming weeks. It was at this point that Charlotte received another, more troubling phone call. A caller asked her to pass an ominous message along to Todd. "You'll never find her." So far, the statement has proven true. Over the years, as different cold case units have investigated the case, cadaver dogs have been brought to the Blackstone River, and an area was excavated in hopes of finding Katrina's remains. These efforts were unsuccessful. Katrina's mother and brother no longer live in Woonsocket. Todd is now a corrections officer in Indiana, but has returned to Rhode Island to speak to police about his sister's case. Charlotte Saulnier visited the Sales Street Bridge every year to throw a bouquet of carnations, Katrina's favorite flower, into the Blackstone River and say a prayer for her daughter, for more than a decade. She only stopped when she could no longer leave her new home in Mississippi because she was providing care for ill relatives. Charlotte still holds out hope that one day she will be able to bury her daughter in their family plot, where Katrina will be able to lie next to her grandmother, rather than in her unknown grave.